did actually spark a little bit of debate, and we're going to get into that. But I want to get into a story first before we almost officially turn the page over to football, despite the fact that there'll be a few things sprinkled in here or there throughout the football season, of course, and a couple of those in this episode. But you sent me an interesting TikTok about Barstool. Now, you're a big Barstool guy. Admittedly, I'm sort of apathetic about Barstool. I don't have any feelings either way. They're not anything that I disassociate myself with. They're not content that I try and seek out. But one thing that I know about them is that they have always prided themselves, at least Dave Portnoy has, on being sort of a rogue entity, being the voice of the voiceless, so to speak. They kind of do what they want. They got purchased a while back for a lot of money. I think it was like $500 million. And yesterday, this kind of bombshell sort of goes off with sports betting where Barstool gets their company back for basically pennies, and ESPN goes into business with Penn Entertainment, which was the company that bought Barstool, to essentially make ESPN Bet, which is now going to be ESPN, the news outlet, and ESPN, the sports gambling outfit, this sole entity. And I think this is fascinating as hell because this is the future, but I'm a little nervous about this future from a morality standpoint. I just want to hear your thoughts on all of this with Barstool and ESPN.
So I think that on the Barstool front, I've always been a fan, and not because I agree with everything they say or do, but I'm a big fan of the whole anti-establishment mentality, and I think that they would fly that flag proudly. Looking at mainstream media today, and not just like your network news, but even sports media, a lot of people would say that it's agenda driven in some way, shape, or form, that there are people who control the narrative within those different organizations. And I think that you could say that Barstool answers to nobody. They have no master, and they are free to literally just speak whatever is on their minds. And that's one of my favorite things about them, and that's why I idolize them. And it's not in some ways. And so, looking at Dave Portnoy specifically, there are certainly things about him that could rub someone the wrong way. But when you look at the world and the successful people in it, a lot of successful people have similar traits to what Dave Portnoy has. Extraordinarily confident, and they really don't give a shit what anyone else thinks about them. And I think that you have to have those two things in order to find your way to success. Because if you're the type of person that's going to be derailed by any snide comment or criticism along the way, you're destined for failure, most likely. And then to kind of talk about the ESPN piece, like I'm a little more open-minded, I think, to the sports gambling thing than you are, perhaps. It's like NIL and paying players. It's happened forever, but now it's kind of like on the up and up. It's on the table, and I'm kind of one of those people, like, I don't care what you do, just be honest about it. And I think that's kind of what's happened in the world of sports gambling is they've taken what's always been going on and just put it above board for everybody to see. I don't necessarily have any issues with it from that standpoint. So I do think it's interesting, though, that the dynamic between ESPN and Barstool kind of had a part in this whole thing, right? Where ESPN was like, we want nothing to do with Barstool Sports in any way, shape, or form. And that certainly played a part in the situation.
So I'm not against sports betting at all. The only conundrum that I want to bring up is the idea that ESPN is also supposed to be a somewhat objective news outlet. And I say news in like the loosest sense because sports news to me is not like news. To me, Adam Schefter breaking a free agency signing is not really critical news. Like, I don't need to know that right just now. If I find that out in a few hours, who cares? It doesn't really affect my life. But I think it's funny because they're reporting on the news, but now they're going to basically have all the sports betting things sort of happening at the same time. And I think what they're trying to tap into is this billion-dollar booming industry of sports betting that is becoming larger and larger and larger. And this is kind of the path that we're on now. It's not dissimilar from what college football is doing with all this conference realignment. They're trying to basically make it so they can make as much money as possible. And ESPN is getting a lot of money. Penn Entertainment came to them and basically said, look, it's not working out with Barstool. Can we come with you? We'll pay you. I think they're paying them like $150 million a year for 10 years just to basically have their ESPN branding on this app to try and capture enough of a piece of the pie so that they can somewhat compete with FanDuel and DraftKings, because those are the two at the top. And it's almost like the way it was put to me was ESPN and Penn Entertainment, they just want to get on the podium. They don't need to be the top dog. And there is millions, billions potentially to be had here. So I wonder about the conflict of interest. But then, as you know, the NFL, MLB, they're all partners with ESPN. So they've navigated this before. And does it really matter? Like, does the regular consumer really care about those moral blurry lines? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either. There's certainly segments of fan bases and the population in general that would object to this for whatever reason. But I'm telling you what, we're a part of a major shift in sports right now as a whole. And we'll talk about it more when we get into conference realignment. But everyone needs to accept right now that your traditions and everything that you probably hold sacred about the sport you're a fan of, the team you're a fan of, the rules the game is played by, like they're going by the wayside faster and faster day by day. And the world is evolving and it's evolving quickly. And I think that especially some of our older fans are going to struggle with this. And not exclusively older fans, but I would say that the older you get, the more you sort of get ingrained in this stubborn mentality and entrenched in your beliefs of tradition and things like. And I love tradition. I'm here all day long for it. I love it. I love it. I love it. But at the same time, I can also see the landscape for what it is and where it's going. I've said it before, evolve or die. Things are going to change and it's going to happen. And me, myself, like I would prefer to find a way to be a fan of whatever is happening than to sit here and take my ball and go home and, well, I'm not going to watch this sport because I don't agree with what they're doing. Like that, the only person that's losing out in that situation is me. Whatever X organization, they don't care that they've lost the coach's fandom.
The only thing that would make me nervous if I was a sports bettor, I know that you are. What makes me nervous about this for people who do engage in that is that it feels like ESPN now could potentially affect those betting lines and it could affect the way people spend their money. Now, at the end of the day, and you and I talk about this a lot, it's your responsibility to do with your money what you see fit. If you're going to place a bet on something that Mina Kimes says, even if she's not deliberately telling you or saying something related to a betting line, then that's your responsibility. But I do wonder how ESPN is kind of going to navigate this because they have to know that they are the preeminent sports media network and something that they say is going to affect those lines and is going to affect people and how they spend their money. Thankfully, that's not our job to figure out, but I do think it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. I know for me, it'll be interesting when you're watching, say, a college football game and you kind of see the lines change throughout the entirety of the game. It will make it funny from a casual perspective to sort of observe that and see how it relates to things like, how they have the winning percentage or the projected winning percentage throughout an entire game. And I think to myself, anything could happen at this point. Like, I understand where they're coming from. And then you see those ridiculous things like the end of the Bills Chiefs game 2 years ago when it was like up, down, up, down, up, down, because you can't predict any of that crap. It'll probably be like that. We'll all be blissfully ignorant to it. But again, I want to warn you, if you spend your money on gambling, always be careful and never, ever, ever listen to a pick of the week and put any money behind it.
No, unless you're gonna fade my picks, that'd be your best bet. You'll see the record at the end of the show. I think one of my favorite things, truthfully, has become like live in-game betting as opposed to the predetermined lines because they change play by play. And so one of my favorite bets to place is in a game there's a heavy favorite. The underdog has managed to keep it close early, and in a situation where the underdog is sort of driving and the line that was maybe, especially in a college game where you get the crazy lines of 20 or plus, 20 plus points sometimes, or even higher in some cases. So all of a sudden now that their defense has stopped them twice, now the underdog's got the ball back, they're driving, they get into field goal range, and you can catch like the overall the game line at -7, where it's opened at -21 or something stupid. And more often than not always, obviously, but more often than not, the superior team is going to get their shit together and they're going to come back and win the game and probably win in convincing fashion. Now, that doesn't always happen, but the odds, I would say, are in your favor in those cases. So I kind of just watch for that line to drop and drop and drop, and then hammer the favorite when it gets about as low as I anticipate it's going to go. I mean, sure, it hasn't worked out a few times, but I'm also not crazy. I mean, I bet for entertainment. I'm not betting to make money. I mean, I'm talking, I bet $5 a game or something, or $10 a game tops. It's just purely fun for me. It just gives me, honestly, it gives me an extra reason to watch a game that I may not have any interest in otherwise. And then to do it live in game kind of makes it even more engaging. So that's one of my favorite things to do. And I think that when you talked about manipulating lines, I think that's been happening for a long time. There was a story I saw, and I can't remember the specific sport that it took place in, but somebody with one of those two, FanDuel or DraftKings, I can't recall which one. There was a tweet that came out. Oh, it was like the draft. It was like the NBA draft, and who was going to be taken like number one overall. And there was a tweet that came out like hours before the draft that said like, "Hey, hearing that so and so is going to go number one," and it turns out the person that tweeted that worked for one of these companies, and it like obviously swayed betting significantly when this tweet came out. And so, yeah, I think that stuff's going on either way, whether it's ESPN involved or not.
For the uninitiated with Coach, if he doesn't show up to the show for a month at a time, it's because he has gotten deep into Thursday night maction and in-game betting and has lost his shirt, and he will be back whenever it is that he gets his money back. Well,